Napa Know How.
If you know how to pick something up and put it in a bucket, you know how to save 20%. This week only, buy a Napa bucket for $2.99, fill it to the top, and boom, you're a savings genius. So hurry in and save, because the Napa 20% off deal ends soon. Quality parts, helpful people. That's Napa Know How.
Napa Know How.
At participating stores, exclusions apply. Minimum 3 items. Offer available July 23rd through July 31st.
Not the house of cards that falls down easily. I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me. Mental Health News Radio, produced by MHNRnetwork.com, your source for information about our favorite subject, mental health. This show is brought to you by our incredible sponsors like ZenCharts.com, the intelligent EHR for addiction treatment organizations, and MyGenetics, that's MyGenetx.com, changing the way people are diagnosed and treated around the world, helping you better understand what makes you well. Don't you want information about yourself that empowers your mental health treatment? Also, who is minding the store, the finances of your behavioral health organization? TriadicLLC.com, that's TRIADICLLC.com, is a full-service revenue cycle management and billing company focused on all the ins and outs of mental health billing. Our sponsors help keep this show on the air and advocating for everyone affected by mental health. Guess who that is? Everyone in the world. Take a listen to our show all the way to the end. You don't want to miss Miles the Therapy Dog's special goodbye. Hey everyone, this is Kristen Sunanta-Walker, host of Mental Health News Radio, and I'm here with a guest that's been on before who was very popular, Hilary Jacobs Hendel, and she is going to talk to us about some new things going on with her and get into some discussion around an article that she wrote for Medium that really resonated with our people, our listeners that follow us on social media. The article is called 5 Qualities to Look For in a Life Partner. So we'll be discussing a lot of different things. But first, Hilary, thanks so much for coming back on our show.
I'm absolutely delighted and honored. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So give our listeners that don't know you yet a little bit about your background.
Well, in a nutshell, I am a born and bred New York City gal who grew up with a psychiatrist father and a guidance counselor mother, and was always very interested in psychotherapy and mostly my own figuring myself out. Later, I didn't initially become a psychotherapist, which is what I do now. I'm a practicing AEDP, which is I'll talk about later. It's a type of trauma and emotion-centered therapy, psychotherapy, and I work with individuals and couples, helping them move past their symptoms that they come in with and blocks by helping them get in touch with their emotions, which are physical sensations. And I guess it's important to say that I came from a psychoanalytic background. I am also a psychoanalyst. But when I discovered this new way of working just by dumb luck of ending up at an emotion and attachment conference back in 2003, it not only changed the way that I would decide to work and help people, but it really changed me and the way I understood myself, and it helped me so much. And so my passion has been sharing that information initially in my practice, but now through my writing, because I think that what I learned, even though it was in an academic setting, can apply to lay people, to the general public, that if I had learned some of these things early on, I think I could have spared myself some mistakes in life and felt a lot better.
Well, yeah, what we all wish that we knew, but as you said this on the first show, those quote unquote failures are some of our deepest learning lessons, as long as we apply them and evolve from them.
Exactly.
So what was the impetus for writing this particular article, the 5 Qualities to Look For in a Life Partner?
It really has to do with my love for helping couples who love each other and want to love each other better and more kindly and more deeply, what are the things that help people connect on a deeper level? So many of us, I mean, I would have to say universally, humans are wired to connect. And what I mean by that is we come out of the womb from the day we are born, and we're basically a body, and we learn by being held and by being looked at, in the eyes, by being swaddled and nursed and cooed at, we're ready, we're just dying for connection. And when that connection goes well and what we give out comes back in a gentle and kind way, we grow up to be, in most cases, of course, genetics and disposition are a factor, but largely we learn how to connect and feel comfortable in our skin and with our emotions. And it's really our parents that teach us our emotions and how to love and how to be okay with our needs and wants. And when we grow up and when those things go well, when we connect to in adult relationships, we have some tools to be able to do that. But when things don't go as well, and also because we don't get any education in these type of life skills in high school, which I really think we could, there's so much that we can learn just intellectually, not even having to have an emotional experience, which is the way that I work, to help people have emotional experiences. But there's so many things that people can learn that's at least food for thought on how to have a more fulfilling relationship. In other words, fights that people have, and some people just spend their whole relationships fighting to the point where they kind of love and need each other, but they also hate each other's guts.
Right.
And because they can't, there's a constant stalemate. One partner, expresses something that they're unhappy about, then the other partner gets defensive, then the other person doesn't feel heard, then they both start getting angry and escalating. And there's some very simple things in idea that can be done, and then over practice can really be honed and really change a relationship for the better. So I like helping people how to love and communicate with each other better.
Interesting. And how about, those relationships where neither partner had parents, their parents were extremely toxic people, one or both parents, so they didn't learn any of those healthy tools.
Right, exactly. And the more neglecting or hurtful people are treated, the more dangerous when they grow up other people become, not consciously, but because the brain wires in our experience. So if our mother or father was mean to us, we grow up with this implicit, you could call it unconscious or automatic expectation that the world at large will be mean to us, that the world, when we're young, is represented by what our parents do. And then we bring those expectations to our adult relationships. So very simply, if when we were children, we expected our parents to treat us well because they did, and that's just the expectation, we tend to trust other people more and expect them to treat us well. And when they don't, we feel it and we're like, this is not okay. But if you grow up being mistreated, then you grow up with those expectations, and you might not even realize that you are being mistreated. It just might feel like this is how relationships are supposed to be.
Right.
Really, yeah.
Many of our listeners talk about, the reason why they get in such dangerous and toxic relationships is because that's, what was modeled, and that's what they believe love is, that love is about, being verbally, mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually abused. So they equate, because of what happened to them as a child, they equate love with those things. And that certainly isn't what love actually is. But it's a long road of processing to figure that out.
Absolutely. And, one, I think, important thing to mention here, and I'm curious your response to this, is one of the things I like about the accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy, this AEDP methodology. And I agree with it because it's based on neuroscience and based on how we know how the brain forms and the body and the connection between the two, is that I do believe that people may be covered under many, many layers of self-protection and even some distortion of how things should be. But at the core, we know what love feels like. We know what safety feels like. And the way I know that is by being in a room when I'm doing a session with somebody who suffered a tremendous amount of trauma or neglect. And the very first thing, my job is to help create a sense of safety, emotional safety, and safety in the connection that I have with this person, because that's the foundation from which all possible work stems. Who's going to look at scary places inside them and not feel safe? That wouldn't be smart. So when you start to do these basic motherly or I don't know about to trigger people, but like a good therapist sort of knows how to connect and attach in a safe way that's reminiscent of infant mother. People universally respond, which tells me that it's there. It's there from the get-go in a treatment. And my goal is to just help the person feel safe enough to access that. And we do that by helping to regulate and calm the body from the very first session in these very simple ways. Like to give you an example.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, just by expressing overtly, we say in AEDP that we want to make the implicit explicit. So just by telling someone that my goal is for them, that their safety is the most important thing, and that they don't have to take care of me, and that I am here for them. If anything doesn't feel right, I want to know, and that we're going to go very slowly and track moment to moment how they're doing, so that if at any moment their anxiety starts to rise, we stop what we're doing and then we check in. What does it feel like inside? And let's see how we can make you more comfortable. And over time, by just putting the person first, not the content and not the story, but the person's safety, the sense of calm enough, as calm as we can get someone in the beginning who's been very hurt in childhood. The brain starts to realize and change that this is different, that we're doing something different here, and that this may be somebody I could trust. And that all these natural things come online, that when the person was born, they came out wanting to love and wanting to connect in a healthy way. And these things start to come back online. And the idea is you translate these out to relationships, and often bringing in partners and teaching them how to slow down the way we do in session, and not only listen to what each person is saying, but much more important is to notice the body language, so that if I'm speaking with my partner, I have something to say, and I am slowed down and noticing them and looking in their eyes and looking at their body language, and they start to pull away, or they start to cringe, or the expression on their face changes to something that doesn't look happy. That's my cue to not keep going and talking, but to stop and say, okay, I see that you're pulling away. You must be having some kind of reaction that doesn't feel good. Let's slow down and figure out what just happened so we can get back on course and come back where we're on the same page again.
Right.
That makes sense?
It does. It does. We were talking, before we started recording about CBT, and there's also DBT, and those are very popular forms of therapy. And I have some friends that are, trying these methods now, and they're having some success, but I always have felt a little bit like there's something missing there. So I wanted to, get your thoughts on those methods that are used in therapy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I am a believer that the more I think that to me, a good therapist learns as much as possible because every person you work with is different. And the more tools you have in your toolbox, the better. So, for example, even though I'm trained, specialized in helping people reconnect with with emotions as they are experienced in the body, I do think that is the most effective way to get change and transformation. It's just because of the way the brain is organized. It's like trickle-down economics. If you start with thoughts, it's a much slower process to translate changing in how you feel in the body. And it's really the initial reaction that we have in our body that triggers fight or flight reactions, and then that sets off a cascade of thoughts. So if you can change, for example, stop someone from having a trigger, they won't need to work on the thoughts and apply all this hard work that DBT requires. Be that as it may, some people are not ready to do that kind of work from the get-go, and they need skills. And I often send people for DBT therapy concurrently with the work that we're doing, because inevitably they're going to have to be able to manage some emotion. And if they have skills on the other side through DBT to do that, it's just more help and more support.
Right.
More is more, and more is often better. The flip side of that is I've had people come to me from taking DBT where the talk about deficits and acting as if was absolutely damaging, because what they were really suffering from was a shame-based depression.
Right.
And DBT just made them feel more ashamed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's a great segue into, because I found this fascinating. I guess it's an article that you wrote for the New York Times called "It's Not Always Depression, Sometimes It's Shame."
Yeah.
And it was fascinating. If you don't mind, delving into that, because many of our listeners, to my show in particular, are in very abusive or have been in toxically abusive. Well, of course, an abusive relationship is toxic regardless, but they're coming out of, those kinds of relationships. And not only do they have their own shame that they're processing and feeling like they're depressed and everything that goes along with that, but they also feel like they're carrying the shame of this other person that was abusive to them in the relationship, who seemingly, looks for other people to offload their shame onto, since they certainly don't want to carry it. So that's been an interesting road to sort of traverse with people. Oh, I see. You're carrying your own shame and you've become the receptacle for someone else's too. What a load to carry.
Absolutely. And it's so painful. And I often refer to, I think in my book, I call, I think I said this about, because this is the way I think of it, that shame is like a hot potato. So it's like, here, you have it. You're the weird, you're wrong, you're bad, not me. And of course, in relationships, it's by definition two, which took me a long time to understand. Like, when I was younger, I was like, well, my conscience is clear here. I am, it's your fault. You're the bad guy. And now I understand, it took me a while, that, people are playing off each other in not only conscious ways and what they're saying, but in unconscious ways. I used to hear from my kids and former people in my life that, my tone was like harsh. And I would say, well, it's just me. There's nothing I can do about it. It's just how I talk. And yet, through emotion education, through that first initial conference on infant mother research about tone and gaze and body posture, we do have control over all these things, and they matter. And more than what we say to our partner, much more matters the way we say it, the tone of voice, the soft look in our eyes. Again, if we're not wanting to get somebody's survival strategies, defensive strategies up, we have to work hard to present what we want to say in a way that somebody can hear it, which means working hard not to get their guard up. And That is, of course, not easy, takes a lot of work, but it is so worth it. And then it becomes a new normal. And people learn new ways of relating, and it just becomes an automatic because the positive reinforcement just, there's no reason to do it any other way. You start to have productive conversations as opposed to unproductive conversations.
Yeah, that's been the interesting thing for me to learn, having two parents that were both abusive. So my modeling was completely skewed in my family and everything. And that's like many of my listeners too, and many people around the world. I'm certainly not unique in having that experience. But what was interesting, or what's been interesting on my journey, is to just keep trying to have healthy relationships and do the work, therapy and anything. I mean, my God, if someone said, okay, you need to sit on a crystal on a mountain for 10 days because that will help. I mean, I would do it. Like I would do anything. So, and any kind of, therapy, traditional therapy methods as well. But the biggest piece for me, and of course the journey, is everything that happened on the journey is, what gets you to where you are today. But having many, many healthy, loving friendships and having a healthy, loving friendship with myself has put me in a place to where I don't allow those kinds of abusive relationships in anymore, because I kept trying. I said to a friend the other day, boy, have I had to kiss a lot of frogs in terms of even just friendships to have the friendships that I have today. And because I'm so well cared for in that way, and I care for myself as a friend that I deeply love and care about, I simply don't tolerate those kinds of relationships. They may still try to come in, but I quickly do what I need to do to, to get out of them. So that's been a big piece for me. And that's something that, our listeners have talked about as they've listened to this show, for 5 years and watched our regulars on their own journeys. That's been an interesting piece.
It's such a huge piece. And, I would want to ask you now and I would flip roles with you and be curious, what were some of the hardest emotional things you had to do? Like, I mean, there's so much there. It's a really tall order job to do that, because there's so much mourning for what was lost. There's so much fear, I think, in terms of the right to set limits and boundaries and to have to tolerate other people, the conflict, the interpersonal conflict of other people being mad when you say no and you be treated well. I mean, this is where, therapies that don't pay attention to how to deal with emotions, I think, do a disservice, because to do what you just said you did requires feeling feelings, not in a way that re-traumatizes one, I think, but where you learn to work with your feelings and experience them in a safe way. And often that takes like someone there with you, because these feelings that were initially blocked happen, in so much aloneness that we need to undo the aloneness, as we say in AEDP, by having somebody there who can just be, there's no greater regulator or self-soothing of emotions than another person who can either just hold your hand or hug you or just be with you, whatever feels better.
Yeah, that certainly has happened with the friendships that I have. And a lot of it too was just saying, hey, I feel awful right now, and honoring that something very painful just happened. And I'm going to sit with this feeling. I'm not going to look for an escape for it with food or with getting into another relationship that's probably unhealthy, because I'm not in a great place right now to make a decision about a relationship. Just sitting with feeling that pain and learning how to self-soothe, learning how to realizing, okay, well, you know what? You've gotten through many, many painful times. You're still here. You're not going to die. Why don't you just sit with this and feel all of it? and realize that you can do that.
I mean, and can I ask, and you don't have to answer this if it feels too personal on the air, but I'm wondering, like, how do you do that, right? Because that's the hard thing. What do you sit there and meditate? Like, what does it look like when you're sitting with an unbearable feeling?
You're just sitting there with an unbearable feeling. Cry, reach out to whatever it is you believe in terms of something, spiritual, and I'm talking about me and, what I've asked other people as well, but getting up and doing something to help you get rid of the anxiety attached to the pain. So taking a walk or deep breathing, certainly meditating, all of those kinds of things. I kind of look at it like, many people are, because they didn't receive the nurturing that they needed or wanted as a small child. So they didn't learn how to self-soothe. It wasn't safe. Their environment wasn't safe. And so you really have to learn how to do that as an adult. So instead of being a giant baby or a baby walking around in an adult's body and lashing out and spraying emotional bullets on other people to sort of discharge your uncomfortable pain, going back in some ways to being that baby, maybe even laying in a crib when you're crying and no one came to help you, or they came in and they were harsh with you because you're crying. Sort of reliving that as an adult. You're not in a crib, obviously, but you are with yourself and you're by yourself. And what can you do now that can help soothe you? Reading a book, whatever it may be, that is something loving to yourself rather than, like I said, running to food or alcohol or, a substance of some kind, or over shopping or gambling, all the things that we do to escape just sitting with our pain.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's my experience too. Right on.
Yeah, we're quite resilient beings. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just checking that you didn't have some secret that I could hear, but it's comforting that we're all sort of on the same page. And the other thing that I would add to that, in the type of therapy that I do, which is also derivative of Richard Schwartz and IFS, internal family systems therapy and parts work.
No, I don't.
It's a fabulous method I write about all throughout my book and the stories in my book that therapeutically, when someone is overwhelmed by a young child part, right, that's just suffering, you can help people get separation from it. It looks like something like this, as you're sitting here with me, is there some way that you could get a little bit of separation? And this is me talking to a patient, a little separation between you and the part that is just so despairing.
Mm.
Even if you can imagine that part could come out of you and sit next to us so that you can really try to see it through your present day adult eyes.
Ah, yes.
Believe it or not, this very often people can do this, takes some mental energy, but it offers immediate relief. And it's taking advantage of neural networks and childhood there's child networks and present day networks, and you're sort of, people can start to visualize baby parts of them. Or child parts, they can see them in a memory, they can know what age they feel like, and then the healing work is then relating as the adult to the child part as a new good parent, and basically over time figuring out by communicating with that part, either non-verbally if it's a baby or if it can talk with words, what it needs. And so the reason it's healing is you're building bridges between neural networks and integrating the brain so that the intensity and the volume on these younger despairing parts goes down quite a bit over time.
That is so beautiful. This is the original reason why I wanted to do a show like I do, because it really was a love letter to people that choose to be in behavioral health, that choose to be in the counseling profession, because doing those types of exercises with people, as just your own self walking around through the world, it's not like you sit down and think of yourself, oh, I'm going to, get outside of myself and look at this younger version of me and sort of be detached from it in a way, but witnessing what's happening so that you're not sitting in the trauma of that moment. Not many people, unless they've been through the kind of therapy that you're talking about, know that they can actually do those things. So that's the beauty of going to a wonderful therapist, is here's this person that can guide you through that process in a very safe, loving way.
Yes, I think it's so important. And that's, again, I want to say not to promote the book, although when I'm doing it, I'm mentioning the book now, because why I wrote the book is because people do only, if you happen to stumble upon the very small group of therapists that know about these ways of working, and why it's such a small group, I still don't know. I think it has to do with politics and the very powerful DBT and insurance company and CBT. Mm-hmm. That as it may, I think these ways are going to be the wave of the future, because they take advantage of the neuroplasticity and what we know about the mind and the brain. But in the book, I share all this. I show how I do this in stories. I talk about the science without any jargon, using stories. You will learn all about parts, how to separate from parts, why this is healing, and what it looks like through these 7 stories. So I really think, then people can take this book and give it to their therapists. And the therapists have a whole education in trauma treatment, basically, and emotions, written simply. So that's sort of my fantasy, is how my little piece of trying to help the world.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I remember that. I remember I've done, probably they're not all posted. Some interviews we took down or we're re-editing, but I've probably done about 700 interviews at this point. And, I love, almost everyone I've interviewed. It's been fantastic. And I distinctly remember yours as being extremely unique for exactly what you're talking about. And I know your book's not coming out until 2018, but we've said your book, people now are going to listen to this and be salivating for what's the name of it so that I can get it when it does come out. So do you mind sharing that?
I would be thrilled to share it. The book is called It's Not Always Depression. It's coming out. Random House is publishing it, which is such a great honor also. And it comes out on February 6th. And I don't know if this podcast is heard outside of the United States.
Yes, but all over, 170 countries.
Wow. So the book is also going to be published by Penguin in the UK and mainland China and Taiwan and South Korea and Poland so far as the European countries come in. And so February 6th, and it's available for pre-order if you want. But the best thing to do, I think, if you don't feel like pre-ordering the book, is to come to my website at, it's either hilaryjacobshendel.com or thechangetriangle.com. Both take you there, because this thing that I'm writing about, I've nicknamed the Change Triangle. It's an academic concept that I learned about that I just thought the public could benefit from, and there was no reason why a small group of therapists only should know about it. And it's basically how emotions work in the mind. And I write a blog, and I have free resources on the website. And, if you look around and read about what the Change Triangle is, and you read some of the blog posts, you'll be sort of primed and ready for the book, which will be, I basically wrote everything I know in a way that, again, was sort of easy and interesting to read, not academic, because I'm not a great reader that way. I like to, I like page turners, so I try to write it to be a whole experience that you could read in a couple of days.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Hilary, for coming on again. I know that you are slammed with your practice. I do want to ask you one last question before we go. Is there a site that lists where these small group of therapists are located?
Yes, and I mean, it's not that small because it's, all over the world too, but these are the places that I would look up for this type of emotion and work that incorporates the body, not with touch as body workers do, but in terms of noticing what's happening physically as a complement to what people are talking about. So I would look up, I'll just say the acronym is A for accelerated, E for experience, D for dynamic, and P for psychotherapy, AEDPinstitute.org. That's where you can learn about training for AEDP, and there's free articles there, and there's lots on the website. And the IFS, Internal Family Systems Therapy, is another thing to look up. Somatic experiencing, Peter Levine's work. Sensory motor psychotherapy, Pat Ogden's work. Healing shame, Sheila Rubin's work. Because shame is a huge deal, and if therapists need to read about shame. They need to read Gershon Kaufman's book, The Psychology of Shame. They need to read Nathanson's book on shame and pride. These things are they're in every therapy session. Anyone going and asking for help is dealing with shame, and there's no reason that it has to be dealt with silently. If someone feel alone, these things can be talked about. So there's tons of resources. AEDP is growing all over the world, but I mean relative to CBT, DBT, and psychoanalytic psychotherapy, it's still very small. And
right.
It's very particular town, when I try to refer people, I can't find therapists, and it's demoralizing.
Right.
Because I think this is the quickest. It's not quick like in 3 sessions, but it is the most sort of efficient way to work with trauma and anxiety and depression.
Well, good. Thank you for sharing that with us, because I know there'll be people are, mostly listening to these shows through iTunes. So having the websites to go to and knowing when your book is going to come out, that's huge. So I wanted to just say thank you again for agreeing to come back on and talk about this. And hopefully, after the book is published, and I know that's a busy time for authors. So maybe after some of that time has passed, you can come back on and kind of, talk more about the book and talk about the experience of getting it out there.
Anytime, and never too busy for you, Kristen. The one thing that I didn't say is that I would welcome and love it if anyone listening came to my website to join my mailing list. I don't spam. I don't sell the list. Once a month, I send a new article, and it's my personal email when you sign up, so that it's a great way to stay connected. If people have anything they'd like me to write about, or if I can be a resource, I just want to help.
Yeah, and I want to make sure our listeners know it's Hilary Jacobs, Jacobs, Hendel, Hendel.com.
Yeah.
And I signed up, my whole team did. We get notices about these articles. They're always fantastic. So I know everyone gets a ton of email these days. These are so worth getting.
Thank you. And thank you for chatting today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to thank our listeners for another edition of Mental Health News Radio. Get ready for it, because here it comes. But first, thank you again to our sponsors like EverythingEHR.com, devoted to helping organizations finding the best electronic health record in behavioral health, and Service Dogs by Warren Retrievers, SDWR.org, a nonprofit organization that provides service dogs to those with unique abilities and invisible diseases, to include autism, diabetes, epilepsy, and PTSD. Until there's a cure, there's a dog. And hey, an SDWR service dog is at work every day with one of our own team members. If you have a question, visit us at mentalhealthnewsradio.com or our network of podcasters at mhnrnetwork.com. Disruptors, healers, technologists, advocates, and most importantly, voices to be heard from all corners of the globe. Thank you so much for joining us.
And now a final word from our therapy dog, Miles.
Good boy.